I'll call to order the meeting of May 15th of the Santa Barbara City Council Finance Committee. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak to any item that is not on our agenda? Seeing no one, we'll go to the first item on our agenda, which is the transfer and appropriation of funds for construction of light industrial buildings at 6100 Hollister Avenue. Mr. Bodette.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. So this is actually, this item is not related to the budget review process, so I'm going to hand it over to the Airport Department to start us off.
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Bullers. I'm with the Airport Department. I'm an administrative analyst with the department. As you may recall, we came to council about a week ago to talk a little bit about our light industrial development at the airport, and council referred the proposed appropriation of funds to the Finance Committee to talk a little bit about the terms of our proposal. So I just wanted to go through that a little bit. Again, just a little background. 8 acres of land was sold to Direct Relief in 2014 for about $8.7 million. The airport took that money and created a development fund to develop further light industrial buildings on airport property. That development fund then would fund future construction by splitting its revenues between the Airport Operating Fund and the Airport Development Fund. So again, just to kind of go over the site, you can see in orange here the project location north of Hollister Avenue, pretty much across the street from the Airport Administration Building, and just west of the airport's long-term parking lot 2. Quickly, the site plan, this would be at full build-out. It's 47,000 square feet, approximately 9 buildings. We received construction bids for the project in January. We bid 5 buildings. We actually awarded 3 of those buildings to Tomar Construction for a total of about $5.4 million. The project budget didn't have enough money to do buildings 4 and 5, so that's kind of what we're talking about doing, is funding those extra buildings. So again, buildings 1, 2, and 3. Building 1 is about 3,800 square feet of retail space. Building 2 and 3 are mirror images of each other, about 4,400 square feet of light industrial space. That contract award also included stormwater treatment and landscaping for the entire site, and also parking lots and sidewalks and street lighting and all the infrastructure that's associated with those 3 buildings. So kind of just to locate those here on the site plan, those are the 3 buildings closest to Frederick Lopez Road. The retail building is the one located right on the easternmost portion of the site. Buildings 4 and 5 are about 4,700 square feet each, located in the middle of the site. Again, light industrial buildings. There's associated infrastructure that would need to be built for those buildings, parking lots and sidewalks, again, lighting. The bids in January came in at about $3.4 million, and again, that was about $3 million over budget. So what we're proposing to do is to transfer $3.1 million from the City General Fund to be repaid at 3.5% interest over 9 years. That $3.1 million includes interest for about 1 year while the buildings are being constructed and before they start generating revenue. And then the loan would be repaid from the Airport Development Fund. So those 5 buildings would be generating revenue, and that revenue would then pay back the general fund. Ultimately, it'd be backed by the Airport Operating Fund and its reserves. So kind of just looking at the financial impacts over a 15-year period under 2 scenarios here. So 3 buildings, these are the ones that are currently under construction, versus the 5 buildings if we were to go forward with the loan from the general fund. In terms of at the end of the 15-year period, the operating fund under the 3-building current scenario would generate about $200,000 more than the 5-building loan scenario. The development fund would earn significantly more money with 5 buildings, $5.5 million, but after debt service, it would have a balance of about $1.8 million after the 15-year period versus $2.6 million with the current 3-building scenario. So overall, the kind of summary of the revenues between the operating fund and development fund, about $7.5 million versus $4.8 million. And then in terms of the next steps, we currently have buildings 4 and 5 out to bid, so we'd need to return to council after that to award the contract. And then we'd also need to return to council on a concurrent basis with a proposed resolution to memorialize the terms of the loan agreement. And with that, we'll take any questions that you might have.
Are there questions for Mr. Bullers? Councilmember Dominguez.
I guess I would just ask, what are the assumptions you're making when you're looking out at a 15-year financial impact?
Sure. So we tried to take a more conservative view of the revenues that would be generated from the building. So each year we go to the Airport Commission with rental rates for our different types of properties. So we kind of took a middle of the road, $1.45 per square foot a month rental income for the light industrial, and then about $1.90 a square foot for the retail component. We also double-checked that with some of the local commercial rental companies publish quarterly reports with kind of the rates that people are asking and receiving on a quarterly basis, so it's pretty consistent with that. And then we inflated that about 3% a year over that 15-year period, which is pretty typical for airport leases. They generally have a cost of living increase with a minimum of 3% and a cap at 8%.
What was the low point in rent in the last recession?
I'm not sure.
And did it drop like 50%, 25%? Were we locked into longer term leases that created more of a lag?
Good afternoon, Hazel Johns, Airport Director, Finance Committee. During the recession, commercial industrial leases didn't drop dramatically. Aviation leases did drop, but not the commercial industrial properties. They pretty much held steady over the years. I can't recall when we've ever had a significant drop. I have to admit, we did make some adjustments during the really bad times for some of the yard use tenants, reducing their rent by 1 or 2 cents per square foot, but nothing dramatic on revenues.
So I'm guessing that's because there wasn't a big bubble. There wasn't a lot of speculation.
Right. I mean, there were still businesses and, hardworking tenants, and most of our tenants, quite frankly, I would say 85 to 90% have been at the airport for more than 10 years. We have tenants that have been there 45 years. So they're a core group of strong businesses, small, but still very profitable.
Great. Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
Any other questions? I have some questions. So let me start at the beginning. We sold 8 acres for $8.7 million, and the total development cost of all of these properties is $8.8 million. We're taking half of the revenue from the DRA and applying it to this equation, or what am I missing there?
Councilmember Hart, so the numbers in here are just the construction costs, so there's no soft costs in there. So we had some soft costs to design the development. There's also some construction management. And then there's also the cost of the public road, so we are splitting that with direct relief, Wallace Becknell Road. So that's about $1 million for the airport as well.
Okay. So that 8.8 doesn't include those costs. Okay.
Correct.
So that's where you need the 3 is to flesh out that to get to 0.
Correct.
And then after the 15 years, this over the 15-year term, it will generate $7.5 million. Is that what your pro forma shows?
Correct.
So there's still time. There will still require time to earn back the investment in total beyond 15 years.
Yes.
Is that 20 years? How long will it take to earn back the investment?
Commissioner Hart, the idea is that the development fund will repay the loan.
Mm-hmm.
The development fund was established so that we could do future development in the commercial industrial area.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's not like it's if we pay for it, then we continue to put money into the development fund. Half of the revenues from that the light industrial development for future development on the north side.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of a pay as you go.
So the $7.5 million isn't accounted the way my perception of it isn't the right. So try that again. Explain that to me again. So you had a sale of the building. You
Right.
had $8 million.
8.7, yes.
And you're using that for this development.
Yes.
All 100% of that for this development. And you're borrowing additional money to finish that development or the phases that we're talking about. And so you have something like $10 million plus invested in the project.
Yes.
And then you're going to have rents over a 15-year term that generate $7.5 million.
Yes.
Okay, so my point is that after 15 years, you won't have recouped the initial investment.
We won't recoup the whole cost, but we will recoup the amount of the loan.
Yes.
We will have paid our fair share of the road work,
Right.
the sidewalk and the landscaping and the other stormwater improvements that we're doing, sort of like infrastructure. We will have paid in cash for 3 buildings, and we will have repaid for the 2 that we're asking for the loan. So once it's paid for, then
Yes.
it just generates extra revenue.
And so that's the point, the longer term, not the 15-year term.
Right.
But is it 20 years to fully capitalize the investment? How much more rent term do we need to get to that profit place where you're actually making money?
If we didn't borrow the money,
No, you have to borrow the money, you have to build it.
finish it.
All the costs are the costs. It's just
I'd say after 10 years, I don't even think 15 years. I think it would have been, once we pay it back, then it's all revenue for the city, for the airport.
after 10 years.
Yeah, once we pay the loan back, then we have no debt. We have fully funded facilities, and we're generating revenue, just like we do in all of our other buildings.
Right, because you have the $8 million for the purchase price initially.
Right.
Then that's an asset. And did you do the present value benefit of having that $8 million invested and what that does differently as opposed to this development plan? What if you just put that money in CDs over this time period? Is there
We wouldn't make nearly the return, I don't believe. But we didn't do it. But as far as I know, you'd never make the money back.
The current rates that we're making, so on our operating fund, for example, we have about $4.5 million in reserves, and we've been earning about $120,000 in interest annually.
okay? So there you go. So
No
over 10
way.
years, you'd make $1 million-ish, $1.5 million, something like that. And here you're making $7.5 million after 10 years. Okay, well, that's a great way to compare it. Thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. And then the reason not to do the rest of the development, once you're borrowing money to do this now, and this makes sense on these 5 buildings, but you have the 4 other buildings, why doesn't it make sense to borrow money to do that as well?
We actually haven't looked at that in total. there is one other parcel up next to Direct Relief that I would choose to develop next, as opposed to where the camper shell building is on Hollister.
Because that's an existing tenant that has revenue generating today.
That's
But
correct.
it can't,
And the other has yard use tenants in it, but it would just make the area look better if we were to develop that parcel.
so how long is it that you imagine that you'd wait before you would do that second phase of development?
Well, it will be a while. I don't know, but I think the other parcel that we were looking at, the one by Direct Relief, is another $3 million about, because it has parking and roadway improvements there as well as the building. And another option could be bonding and pay it out over a longer term. The goal would be to move as quickly as we can to get that done.
So
And once we reach that point to where we actually are generating, I think in Tom's forecast, he shows in 2020, 21, 22, the revenues falling to the bottom line at the airport are significant, almost like the old days. So if we have $1.8 million falling to the bottom line, there's nothing that says we can't put more money in the development fund and move quicker. It depends on what the priorities are at the time.
So that's really the timing of it, is how fast the development fund accumulates the funds necessary to do it.
Right.
And amongst other competing needs to, what other developments?
Well, there will be development on the aviation side. Remember, with the master plan, we're going to have to look at coupling our share of federal funds, which is a great share because it's less than 10%, to do more ramp space, probably do more taxiway connections, always taking care of the aviation side. We also want to buy a new boarding bridge for the terminal to complete the whole area that we have for boarding bridges. And so there will be other projects along. But I think that the north side is a gem for the airport. It generates a lot of money. And we really need to keep a focus on that as well.
So the development fund isn't exclusively for the north side land-based uses. It is a combined fund for all the capital needs at the airport?
Actually, we set it up for the north side. It doesn't mean that it can't be expanded to use on the south side, but it was set up for the north side.
Okay. So again, why wouldn't whether it makes sense from the general fund impact, separate from that, that's a different question. But the question is, why wouldn't it make sense to borrow money to complete this development? Is because it's the existing leases that have to be maintained and the other properties?
The existing leases are month to month, so that wouldn't, it would be a transition, and we would certainly want to assist our existing tenants for relocation. So that I don't see as an issue. I think we just haven't looked at what it would take to pay it back, but we can certainly do that, because I agree it would be great to have the whole thing done.
Okay.
Get it done and go forward. And Tom can do the numbers, and we can see if that works.
Well,
But I hadn't thought about the hit to the general fund. That could be another, $7, $8, $9 million.
One of the other things I'd like to add is when we did the 5 buildings, we wanted to make sure that the revenue from the buildings was going to be able to pay back a loan over a reasonable period of time. So by adding that extra building or buildings, we were kind of going to either extend the term or wind up having to subsidize the development fund from the airport operating fund. So we were trying to find that sort of sweet spot where we wouldn't have to do either of those things.
So you've run all these calculations, and you've done all these different scenarios, and this is the sweet spot?
It's for a reasonable term of the loan, yeah, I think this is a good size development.
Okay. And then the other, so that would be significant to the general fund, $7 to $9 million, and that probably would make the difference between whether we can do it or not. And I see Mr. Casey racing up to probably say that.
I could
but
almost have $10 million.
But we do have the other have the other loan for the airport, and what I'm trying to get to is, as everybody looked at all this from all the perspectives and made sure, if we're going to do this, is this the right exact balance point to do this, or is there more, or is there less? And that's where I'm trying to. That's why we're here. Actually.
Exactly. That's exactly a great conversation. Appreciate having it. City as developer, what's kind of the right call as we kind of develop out this property at the airport. The original vision was to sell the property to direct relief, take the money, and then incrementally build out the remaining parcels that we're talking about now on the frontage of Hollister. Take it, build some of the buildings, lease them up, pay off some of the debt as you kind of accrue equity, then kind of march on down and kind of build it out incrementally. Make sure that you're hitting the sweet spot on what you're marketing for and that it's leasing well and it's successful. So that's why we started with
Self-financing was the original
self-financing,
plan. Okay,
correct.
no borrowing.
Correct.
Yep.
So that's why you started with the 3 to 5 buildings there. You had the camper shell lease kind of going on. Financially on the self-financing, it was just those first 3 buildings. Came to council, we released the contract on that. We're then in the budget meeting, and we're kind of talking about it, and we're looking at it, and we go, gosh darn it, we're going to have these 2 kind of empty lots, that are just begging to have something. It's just going to feel wrong. How do we crack that nut and at least finish up to the camper shells that you have kind of a logical first installation of the phase? And that's where we said for a modest loan from the general fund, we could do it. And now's the time to do it when you're under construction. You got a contractor out there and you're doing it. So that's kind of the thought process of where we got to where we are today. It would be a more aggressive play to take out a greater loan to do the entire frontage. I probably myself have confidence that we will lease it up. I think this light industrial stuff just leases itself every day of the week when you talk to anyone in town in the industry. But it's a bigger loan. It's taken on more debt. It's taken on more debt from the general fund that is kind of tied up. You just do have more exposure, and so we haven't been as aggressive as that. So could we do it? Yeah, with more debt you could do it, but I think we kind of like where we're at by finishing up these 2 parcels and kind of having a more logical development of the initial development.
Well, and you may or may not get better bids on a second phase,
Yeah.
depending on the timing of the economy. And this is probably not. This is probably toward the top end of the prices. So if you waited, you might be better.
Yeah, maybe.
But that might be something to think about in terms of when you do the next phase too. Is that in the right cycle, you could save a lot of money on construction. So plug in the rest of the information. I can't recall now again what the other loan is that the airport has outstanding.
The other loan that the city has, it's called an investment as opposed to a loan, and was done 2009, I believe, when we built the rental car QTA, the quick turn facility and storage facility for the rental cars. That particular project needed to be done when we were doing the terminal, or before we did the terminal, so we could have a place for the rental cars to be. And it wasn't a large enough project for bonding, because it would be taxable bonds, not tax-free bonds. And so the city at that time decided that it could be an investment for the city, and the airport took out the loan to pay for that development. And right now I think we have, I can't recall, we have quite a bit of money in reserve for that project. So it's just been creating a cash flow, but we can't use it for anything except for that loan. But that's when we did it in 2009, and I think it was a 20-year term to begin with. And most recently, we renegotiated the interest rate down to 3.5%.
Okay, so these 2 loans are going to be at the same interest rate. There's no advantage to refinancing that into these terms, and there's no benefit to combining them. And okay,
No, actually, we intend to pay it off in 2020.
So you're going to prepay that early because the cash flows have turned around and the revenue's there, and there's no reason to have that additional debt cost.
Exactly, the money's just sitting there. Yes.
But the sweet spot in terms of this loan is being found because you do have that existing loan. So in 2020, you will have a different debt to asset ratio than today. And so the nervousness about taking out too much debt changes in 2020 when you pay off the old debt.
Sort of. the good thing about paying off that debt is that it will generate more revenue for the airport, because currently the debt is paying for the construction of that building. And once it's paid for, then we can rent it and start generating additional revenue from the parcel for the airport.
Yep.
Yeah.
You don't have to pay the debt. You have money in your pocket.
That's
I get
right.
that part.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just trying to make sure everybody's looked at this, and I think, it sounds like you have. But this is probably the time to think about this, is now.
Hopefully.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for anybody? Yes, Mr. Casey.
So just a final comment. Right, we think this is a cleaner development point to build out those last two buildings, and then see how the rest of the finances come up, and if everything's successful, you can finish out the project at a later date, maybe in a good bidding climate. The other policy question for you all just to be considering is the loan from the general fund. And so it is tying up some of the reserves. They'll still be counted as reserves. The airport's good for them. There are ways that we could call the loan and get it from the airport, but that's one thing. And then we're also going to be recommending, as part of Measure C, to do something similar for paying off the remainder cost of the Cabrillo Pavilion construction. The city needs to come up with $5 million next fiscal year. If you took it all in one fiscal year, it kind of really hits your Measure C programming. So we're going to be proposing next week, I believe, maybe a 5-year loan from the general fund to have Measure C kind of pay off that debt to spread it out over a number of years. So that's just kind of the other policy consideration I want you all to be thinking about, is using the general fund as the bank for these loans. We think it's prudent in this case and not a big exposure, but something to be aware of.
Yeah, that's really important in the context of what we're talking about. If we're talking about additional debt for the airport, knowing that there is an additional proposal to have debt from the general fund, that you have to weigh those things in context. So that's very helpful. Any other questions or comments on this item? Do we need a motion for this, or is this just informational at this point? Information? Okay. Well, then, thank you very much for that clarification. We do need a recommendation from council. Okay, Councilmember Dominguez.
I'll make the motion. I saw this presentation before at Airport Commission. I'm the council liaison to the commission, so I'd be happy to make a motion to. Do you want the motion to be recommending this to the full council for approval? Okay, I'd make that motion.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed and abstained? No one. Matter carries unanimously. Thank you. Thank you. Next item.
We're going to continue with our review of the fee changes from the departments. Today we'll be hearing from the enterprise funds. Well, they're going to hear a request from an outside organization for a funding request, and then we'll wrap up with a review of the arts and economic vitality budget. So we're going to start off with downtown parking for fee res changes.
Thank you, Mr. Burdette. Mr. Dayton?
Can you find where it is? Thanks. Good afternoon, Finance Committee members. So Rob Dayton with Downtown Parking to go over the fee changes. The first 5 fee changes are simply cleanup from last time. The first one on page 34, items 7 and 8, we're converting those, we're merging those because they have the same monthly permit fee of $160. We're putting those together and making sure the garages have the numbers and names. And then the next one on page 35, we have, and this is number 23 is the new number. This is our annual residential parking permit. This is for downtown, the downtown areas that get residential parking permits. We also have Area M on the Mesa and L, which is outside of downtown. Last year, we raised the price from 20 to 30, and we had the start go in the middle of the year because that's when the permits actually renew, is at the first of the year, the calendar year. So this is a cleanup to just get rid of the language from July 1 to December 31st and just have it be $30, which has been the cost for the last 6 months. And then next on page 35, just cleaning up on number 35, this is pay by space fee is the parking in the city Helena lot. This is the one down in the Funk Zone. The DPC has a capital project that we're moving forward with to do pay by space rather than have the 90-minute parking in that area. And this is just some language for the heading to be clear. It's for the City Helena lot.
Why is that? Why is it going to be, that will be the only lot like that that's pay by space in the downtown parking system?
That's correct. It's an exploratory step by the DPC. They're looking at ways to use that parking more effectively, particularly in the Funk Zone, as the demand for the Funk Zone happens. The 90-minute format doesn't really work well because the lot's not centralized next to the businesses, so people, there's a lot of walking time from the lot and back to the lot. This will provide people more opportunity to stay for longer periods of time. And the pay by space is just a better way of doing it so that you don't have to walk. You don't have to walk back to your and put it on your dash. You can just enter the space you're in or your license plate. So they're working on some innovative strategies to do pricing, and we had this fee in there last year, but we haven't gotten to the place where we're put in the capital for the Luke systems that freestand similar to the waterfronts.
And there's no kiosk there. There's no parking attendant. There's
That's
no way
correct.
to enforce the 90 minutes. So that's probably more.
Right?
Enforcement
is challenging. Yeah, and the lot's not big enough. It's only 29 spaces for a kiosketeer. Wouldn't make any financial sense.
Okay, thanks.
So the next one on page 35 also is some cleanup. This is from the oversized vehicle parking ordinance. When the council approved this, or before they approved the ordinance, we had put inside the fee what we would anticipate the council would approve for the fee. And that was at that time $650 per permit. These are for the contractor permits, the ones that have oversized vehicles that have a business and they're on the street, so they get a permit for the calendar year. So the council wanted a $100 fee, so this cleans that up and brings it to a $100 fee, and then the time frames are quarterly reductions for the remainder of the year if you get a permit, not at the beginning of the calendar year. And then the next one on the next page is similar. It's related to on page 36. It's similar. This is for additional vehicles. When the council created the ordinance, they wanted additional vehicles to be at a reduced rate. So this is the $50 for additional vehicles within the same business. And then finally, the one additional fee that we're proposing to add this year is a facility use fee. When we have contractors who come in the downtown parking lots and they're using primarily for building and staging construction, when they're in the lots, it's much easier to gauge the cost because we just take the number of spaces they're using and charge them for the daily rate for those spaces. But when they're in the paseos and the other extra properties that are around the lots, we don't have a fee for that to go with our permit. So this establishes a $100 fee to cover the staff costs for administering the permit and then staffing the coordination with the construction that actually happens in real time. It's probably a little bit less than the cost that we employ and the amount of hours that we employ, but we're going to monitor over time to make sure that it's paying for the cost that it takes the downtown parking crew to manage these particular incidences. And that's it.
Any questions for Mr. Dayton? Just one question. So you have been charging this fee for the oversized vehicles since the ordinance went into effect. Are people buying them?
Yes, they are.
How many folks approximately?
Oh, I'm sorry. That would have been great to have that
magnitude? 10, 100?
Oh no, it's more towards 100 or more. I think it's more than 100.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, Councilmember Dominguez?
As the liaison to the parking committee, I would move that we recommend this proposal to the full council.
Motion's been made and seconded. And any comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Oppose and abstain? No. Matter carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Dayton.
Next, we have the golf fund, and we don't necessarily have to have a recommendation today unless it's at the discretion of the committee, but we'll be looking for final recommendations next week as a part of a wrap-up.
Okay. Mr. Sewell, you probably covered a fair amount of this yesterday.
That's right, Chair. I'm Mark Saul. I'm the Parks and Recreation Business Manager. And just move 1 second. There we go. I have the proposed fees for the fiscal year 2019 budget for the Golf Fund. So when we look at our fees across the Parks and Recreation Department, we consider a number of factors. We want to try to make sure we can maximise participation. We want to make sure that we are competitive in the market where there is a market to be competitive in, bearing in mind what our competition are doing. And of course, with golf, there are a number of local golf courses around who compete with us. And we look to also provide community benefits by our pricing strategy to encourage affordability for targeted markets. And finally, of course, we need to be aware of what our operational and capital costs are likely to be. So within the golf realm, there are a number of different fees and a number of different discounts that you can earn depending on where you live or your age or what time of day you want to play. And we also offer as well preferred player cards where there are further discounts available. And of course, if you sign on to the email clubs or look out for promotions, you'll also be able to take advantage of golf at a discount to encourage play at the times where typically we might be a bit quieter than normal. Recommended for fiscal 19 are just a couple of changes. Commencing July the 1st, we're recommending a $1 fee increase for the hiring of a golf cart. You don't have to hire a golf cart if you want to come and play at Muni. But we've recently took delivery, I think a week ago, 10 days ago, of a brand new golf cart fleet. And that fee hasn't changed for at least 9 or 10 years. And so that golf cart fleet costs are significantly more than they were 10 years ago. And we think that it's reasonable to request one extra $1. That would take the cost to $16 for an 18-hole round of golf, retaining the same fee for a 9-hole round. And then from January the 1st, we are recommending a $1 fee increase on our 18-hole rounds of golf only, with no changes to juniors, 9-hole, twilight, anything like that. And again, I mentioned it earlier, we'll continue to offer special offers where golfers will be able to take advantage of cheaper golf at a time where we would typically not necessarily sell all of our tee times. That's the plan. What does that look like? Well, if you are playing during the week, you can play for $31 at the moment, and that will go to $32 if you are a senior or young adult. We are fairly unique in the area that we offer a discount for players who are aged between 18 and 25. They get the same fee as a senior. And then at the weekend, as is typical in the golf industry, there's a slightly higher fee to play, and that represents the demand profile for weekday and weekend play. And then I'll just show you what that looks like on a graph. Where does Muni, locals call it the Muni, SBGC, Santa Barbara Golf Club, there it's ringed on the bottom left-hand corner. Where do those fees compare to some other local golf courses? And you can see during the week, most cases there's a significant saving to be had depending on whether you're a junior, senior, young adult or adult. And then there's a similar story at the weekend where that again is the case. And that's not our strategy to be the cheapest, but of course we want to make sure we are affordable. We are a municipal golf course. We're not in it to make a profit. We are in it to provide recreational opportunities. Mindful, of course, though, of our cost base and our need to continue to reinvest in the golf course. So we think these fees still represent exceptional value for the golfer. And with that, that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. Any questions? Councilmember Friedman?
No questions.
No questions? Okay.
I'll just make we saw a lot of this yesterday, so I think they're reasonable, so I'll make a motion to forward this or to approve this.
Is there a second? Second. Motion's been made and seconded. Any questions or comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed and abstained? Nobody? Thank you. Matter carries unanimously.
Thank you.
So next we have water. Just a reminder that this is fees unrelated to the utility rates. Well, that discussion usually takes place in June.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Malcolm Hamilton, Administrative Analyst in the Water Resources Division. I'll quickly go through these proposed fee changes for fiscal year 2019. Looking at the overview for FY19, most all of our service fees are going to be increasing by 3%. It's generally to maintain our full cost recovery, keep pace with any inflationary cost increases we're experiencing. We have 2 new service fees for existing services that we're providing right now, and I'll get into those in the next couple of slides. There's also several fee adjustments that are outside of this general 3% increase. I'll also talk about those individually. And we really have one other non-fee increase, but it's an update to language pertaining to our water consumption estimates. So, like I said, we have two new service fees. Our first one is a data logger fee. It's $35, and that $35 will be paid by customers on their third request and thereafter within the same fiscal year. So we find the first two to be in line or an extension of our conservation efforts. It helps customers track leaks, but after that, there is some time involved for staff to come and, if you look at this picture, there's a little data logger there next to that laptop. They put it on the meter, they download the data, they send it to the customer. Sometimes there's some back and forth discussion about the data. So there's some time involved, and we think it's a reasonable fee. Of course, if we're doing data logger deployment for city staff purposes or tracking the system needs, metering needs, then we would not be charging the customer. And secondly, there's an after-hours meter turn-on fee. So right now, if you pay your bill right towards the end of the day when the billing office is closing in finance, they'll generate a work order. The work order will be serviced sometime between 5:30 p.m. and, I believe, midnight, and they will come and turn on your water. And it should read there at the bottom, the emergency service workers, or sometimes you'll hear us refer to them as just ESWs. So these are other fee changes that are outside of our general 3% increases. The first is the most substantial. Our connection fees, or providing a new tap to the system, is being reduced by $990. Really, we've stopped providing excavation services. What we found is that we're going to focus on our expertise, which is creating new connections to the water system, and we'll allow the homeowner or the business owner to hire a private contractor, schedule that on their own time, and they will do the excavation, some of the traffic control, the markings on the ground, and then we'll come in, make the new tap. So it's a service we're no longer providing, although I think we could in special instances, but for the most part we just aren't going to provide it, so we are reducing all of our connection fees where applicable by $990. We have a couple of changes to our fire hydrant upgrades. These are just materials cost change. We got new quotes from our vendor. Residential hydrant, I think, was lowered by approximately $400. Our commercial hydrants are up by, I think, just actually a few dollars. We also did a check on our staffing for hydrant flow tests. We found that we're using more staff, and so that fee is increasing from approximately $150 to $325. So that was just an adjustment because of more staffing than we had initially had in the fee resolution. And the last other fee change that's different is backflow testing fee for mobile hydrant meters. If you have a backflow device, the state requires that you test them, so we're adding a fee. That can take anywhere from a half hour to an hour and a half, and if sometimes you have to test them twice, we split the difference. I believe that represents 45 minutes of work for our staff. And finally, as I mentioned, we made some clarifying language changes to our water consumption estimates, just to explain in better detail what is actually going on with that estimate. In addition, there's new language that was added. When there's no water use history or insufficient consumption history from that customer, we will be taking kind of a system-wide average from their class and applying that to get an estimate and make a bill. So that concludes my presentation. I can take any questions if you have them.
Any questions for Mr. Hamilton? I have a question about the no longer providing the excavation services. So does that potentially mean it could take longer for the work in the street to be done if it's not being done by city employees and it's subject to the contractor's schedule?
Mr. Chair, as I understand it right now, that we are going to try to be standardizing when we'll come out and do the tap and essentially scheduling those as soon as possible. Mm-hmm. So we would be incentivizing the homeowner or the private business owner to essentially have that done when we're going to come out, mm-hmm. and not reschedule.
So right now, city workers excavate it, tap it, and do all the work, and charge somebody a fee.
That's correct. I believe that we either do it ourselves or we will ourselves have a contractor do it, but I can check into that for you.
Yeah, I guess the reason I ask is it sounds like there's a economics question versus, service quality. And Mr. Hagmark's chair
Mr.
just clipped, so he's ready to answer that question.
Mr. Chair, committee. We've been looking, particularly with the drought, on how we can do business better. And one of the things that we're trying to do is focus on, we have so many things to maintain in the system. What things can we outsource to the private sector to have them take care of? And a few years ago, you may recall that we actually brought in an outside contractor to help us out with this excavation work. And it helped, but we were still having to manage that outside contractor. And so with this move, we're looking to actually put it on the property owner, who's ever doing the development, to take care of the excavation, which is they come in and get a public works permit. They'll do the excavation. We're thinking this is going to be more streamlined because we'll give them the date. Here's the time where we're going to be there to do the tap, and they get everything prepped ahead of time. Takes that management responsibility out of the city's hands. They can now we're focused on doing the more, what I consider more technical aspects of a new service, and I think they can do it more cost effectively potentially than we can, having to also have to manage that contractor. So I think this is one of those win-wins for everybody in this. Allows us to spend more of our time maintaining the infrastructure that we have, and the new stuff, we can leverage the outside resources of our local contractors.
And has there been discussion with Public Works about the impact in the street? Because this is street work, right?
This is street work, yes.
So.
And it's work that, regardless of how we do it, goes through our Public Works counter, does get a permit, and is noted and monitored. And with all the street work that's coming, there will be a 3-year moratorium and penalties if you need to get in there beforehand. So that's going to be part of that ongoing management of the right-of-way.
Well, I guess that's something I would encourage you to monitor is, how long is the street disrupted in this model versus, the city crew option? Because I think I've noticed that sometimes the street work takes much longer than it should, and I don't know why that is. And I'm just worried that the timing is something like this. If it's the the private sector person who's trying to get water service to their development doesn't have any incentive to get in and out of the street fast like the city workers do, and so that's what fundamentally I'm concerned about.
Okay. Typically, when we give permits, they do have a window for doing the work, and so they have to provide traffic control during that time period, and so there is an incentive. This is a model, actually, it was a couple years ago, we switched over for sewer, so you do the same thing. Private contractor comes in, digs down to the sewer main, exposes everything. Our city staff actually make the connection to the city sewer main. So it's a model that we feel like we've kind of run through and feel pretty comfortable managing. So happy to talk more about those, how long they're in the right-of-way and what projects those are. We can follow up and discuss those. But I don't feel like this is going to put anybody in the right-of-way longer than they already are.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for that answer. Any other questions? Is there a motion for this item?
So moved.
Is there motion's been made and seconded? Any questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Abstain to maintain, or no or abstention? None. Matter carries unanimously. Thank you.
Okay, next we'll hear from the Waterfront Department.
Mr. Chair and committee members, I'm Brian Bossy. I'm the Waterfront Business Manager. And we briefly touched on this last Monday at our departmental budget presentation before City Council, but I am going to go through with it one more time with you and answer any questions that you do have. Our proposed fee adjustments for fiscal year 2019 start with our slip rental fee, and that we're proposing a 2% increase, which is similar to the past 5 fiscal years. It's a percentage that we feel that our slip permittees become quite comfortable with, and really don't hear a lot of grief either way on this one. It's kind of just part of our process anymore. And I'll have a slide here later that shows you what that means with some of our common slip lengths, what that 2% increase is. Next is our slip permit transfer fee, and this we are proposing to increase that $25 per foot. It's currently $450 per foot. We'd like to move that up to $475. This is for slips that are above 30 feet in length. Now, the overwhelming majority of our slips are below 30 feet, and those slip permit transfer fees have already been frozen in prior years. This also frozen have been a number of specifically designated commercial fishing vessel slips, as we are a working harbor and want to continue that into the future. Our visiting or transient vessel fee, we're proposing that vessels 70 feet and above go from $1 per linear foot to $1.50 per linear foot. As I mentioned last week, we probably get on the order of 25 to 30 visiting vessels that meet this criteria of 70 feet and above. So it's not so much a revenue gain for us as it is just trying to cover the costs that these larger vessels have with their pull on water and electricity. Next are two parking permit fee adjustments. The first is our slip permittee parking permit, and these are for folks. We have 1,143 slips, and one per slip, one lucky person per slip gets a slip permit parking fee. Parking permit. Wow, that's a tongue twister. Slip permittee parking permit. And currently it is at $70. And this allows folks to park in primarily the Harbor Main lot, essentially 365 days a year if they have an operable vehicle. This has not been changed. It's been at $70 since July 1st, 2006. We think it's a long time coming, and we'd like to move this up. We've worked with our Harbor Commission Budget Subcommittee on this as well, and we've come up with a dollar figure of $95, which is the equivalent of $7.92 per month. Next is our public parking permit. So these are your non-slip holders or those folks who are slip holders who didn't get that lucky one to start with. And we're proposing that increase go from $100 to $125. And again, this allows parking at all of our waterfront parking lots except for Stearns Wharf, both of these. So you are allowed to park at, I believe it's 7 different lots. This $100 to $125 increase gets you to about $10.42 per month to park down at the various beaches and marinas. Next is our annual West Beach rack permit fee, and these are primarily for folks, the club folks, the outrigger canoe folks, and we are proposing to increase that fee from $1,000 a year to $1,100 per year, so a $100 increase. We only have 6 of those racks. They house 8 kayaks or outriggers, and we're trying to make this more equivalent to what it is for the folks who just have them resting on the sand, kind of your other non-club members of the public. So we're proposing to increase that by $100. And lastly, this is a new one since last Monday, May 7th. And I just want to give you a little background on this. Back in March, I'll even go beyond that. We have 4 different marinas, and in order to gain access in and out of those, we issue slip permittees, visiting vessels, our business activity permit holders, as well as our tenants, including our yacht brokers and things like that, either a key card or a key fob. We use a system known as the Pinnacle system to provide that secure access in and out. It also, not only is it the 4 marinas, but it's also the corresponding restrooms that go with those. Over the 15 years that we've been using the Pinnacle system, we've issued over 20,000 of these key cards or key fobs. That's a lot. And what has happened is we routinely see issues with people who shouldn't be in the restrooms, who shouldn't be in our various marinas. And staff as well as harbor users have been a little bit concerned about that. And so we decided to look at how we can clean this key card issue up. So back in March, our staff provided our Harbor Commission with a presentation on the current issues with our gate key cards and key fobs. We returned on April the 19th back to the Harbor Commission, where they formed an ad hoc subcommittee. And the ad hoc subcommittee actually met on Tuesday of last week. Again, we met with you, the full council, on Monday. That's why you didn't see this. On Tuesday, this is what our ad hoc committee came up with. And the idea is here is to reissue all of these cards and fobs in an orderly manner. Now, currently, we issue up to 9 key cards or fobs to a slip account, per slip account. And again, there can be one person on this account, there can be 10, it can be higher than that, I suppose. So what we're proposing to do is take that from 9 and bring it down to 5 cards or fobs per slip account. And we'll continue to do it at the same dollar figure, $7 for a key card and $12 for a fob. So the dollar figure there doesn't change, just the amount per slip account. Now, beyond that, what we currently charge is 20, if you want to go 10, 11, 12, however many, it's $25 for a key card and $35 for a key fob. What we'd like to do is raise that, regardless of fob or key, or fob or card, move that up to $100. We feel that what happens a lot, people lose them or don't want to look for them, and so they just come in and get another. They can get into the wrong hands, and that's where we end up with problems. So I think people are going to take a whole lot more care of their key cards and key fobs if you're going to have to replace them at $100 per once you get above that initial 5. So that is our last proposed fee adjustment and a little background on where that came from. As far as that 2% slip increase, how does that impact some of your common slips? On the left, you'll see our slip length, the change per foot, and then the change in their monthly fee, which would be for a 20-footer, $3.51, up to a 60-footer, that's $14.72. So with that, it kind of gives you a gauge on what we're working with there. And with that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions for Mr. Bossi? Councilmember Dominguez?
Thank you for the presentation. The adjustments you made in slide 2, what was the underlying philosophy or mission in terms of like the $25 a foot increase for above 30? Is there kind of a harbor mission that this is in conformance with? Or was there a pricing study?
So what we do each year, our operations manager, Mick Cronman, talks with our various yacht brokers. And the whole idea here is you're trading, you're moving boats in and out in a publicly owned space. And so in order to kind of keep that at a reasonable level and not have a quote unquote an underground market and keep it all above board, the city has for quite some time charged a slip permit transfer fee. So it just doesn't get exorbitant. And so over the years, there comes a point with your 20-footers, your 25-footers, your 30-footers, where instead of people, a price point where instead of people transferring boats in and out as an investment, they stop doing that, and they just want to. It keeps recreational boaters or leisure boaters more in play as opposed to trading it as a commodity, if you will. And so there comes a point, it's probably around a 50% of the value point where increasing the slip transfer fee will actually harm those transactions. And so we generally stopped it around that 50% mark. And so that's why we stopped it at the 30, the 28s, the 25s, and downward. As you know, we go much higher than that. We have some very large boats, vessels in the harbor, and we're not quite there yet. But we do monitor this with our yacht brokers and talk with them about all these increases.
And so this is $25 a foot increase. And what's the total per foot?
So for vessels, if this were approved for vessels above 30 feet, so not your 30-footers, so above 30 feet, it would now be $475 per foot.
So it was $450?
Yes, correct.
And then the same question regarding the visiting transient vessel fee. Why was that bumped up? What was the philosophy there?
Sure, great question. So this was bumped up. These larger vessels take quite a bit of use quite a bit of resources as far as water and electricity. And so from our analysis, again, we don't get that many 70 and aboves. It's usually in between 25 and 30 on an annual basis. But just the amount of resources they use from pulling electricity and water, we feel that this is more appropriate and in line with the size of the vessel versus your smaller ones.
Mr. Chair, Committee Member Dominguez, if I may, we also do a comprehensive marina survey that you heard about last week of 18 marinas up and down the coast, and we found that our visiting slip fees were quite below what you'd call market. So we decided to, on the larger vessels, raise it up.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions? I have a question about the parking fees. Has it been a long time since those were raised? Because those are big increases of 30%, more than nearly 30% for the slip permittee parking permit, and 25% for the public parking permit.
Mr. Chair, the slip permittee parking permit was last raised on July 1st of 2006, and the public parking permit was last raised on July 1st of 2015, where it went from $95 to $100. And again, similar to what Mr. Reedman was saying, we do, as part of that 18 marina survey, look into various parking rates, and we're far below what people charge. We've also done a whole lot of additional research into similar cities of our size up and down the coast as to what they charge for their parking permits, and I can tell you that $125 on both accounts is well below what those folks charge, and added to the fact that those are just day use. So what you have in places like Santa Monica, Huntington Beach, and the like are day use only, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. That's what their permit is good for, and then you've got to move. And those are upwards of anywhere from $150 to, I believe, Laguna Beach has $300 a year. So we're slowly trying to get more in line with those types of not the $300, mind you, but just more in line with what the market is charging. And with our public parking permit, you are allowed to stay up to 72 hours in our harbor main lot if you're going out on a boat and things like that.
And what does that survey show for slip rental fees, ours in comparison to the market?
That's another great question. I have an extra slide for you. Good. So again, we come in well below what marinas up and down the coast are charging. These are both the asterisk marinas are private marinas. And so on the left, you'll see the marina name. And then we just took a sampling 30, 40, 50, and 60-foot slip lengths, and then the occupancy rating. So we are very much booked, and then some at 100%. And as you can see, when you go through each of these different slip lengths, we are well below what other marinas are charging. As you can see, denoted on the bottom, private marinas do charge the possessory tax is included in their fees. With our possessory interest tax, which comes through the county, obviously, it ends up being about $25 per year for your 25-footers up to, when you get up to the 90 and 100-footers, maybe I believe it's a little over $100 per year, maybe it's $150. But so even when you add those possessory interest fees in there, it's still well below what other folks are charging.
I think the 2% increase is the lowest of any of the other city departments. Everybody else is at 3%. So those facts argue that this should be 3%, not 2%.
That's a good point. We could do that. We've come to a point with the 2% where it's something that our slip permittees have become somewhat comfortable with. They know it's coming. I believe we've done this for the last 8 fiscal years. Prior to that, I think we did have a few different, 3% here and whatnot, but this provides a gradual increase.
Mr. Chair, we're on a good trajectory in terms of the operating revenues that we get, particularly with the slip transfer fees, which continue to surprise us. So we track it very carefully, and I don't think it's necessary at this time to go any higher than the 2%, but certainly your comment is well noted.
Well, certainly costs, overhead costs for the city, separate from the department, are going at a higher clip than 2%. And so I think it's something you should consider. And I think, the point is that your customers have gotten used to cost of living increases, which everybody has to pay. And I think the CPI is closer to 3% than 2%. So I would make the argument that you should look at that, maybe not this year, but next year. So any other questions? Councilmember Dominguez?
Yep. Following up on those questions, what would be the impact if you raised it? Is it like land rentals where people might move on, or does it change your occupancy rate closer to the other comparables up here?
I don't think it would change our occupancy rate at all. A 2% versus a 3% is a lot of those figures I showed you will stay. It would still be an 18-cent increase, 18 cents per month increase. So it really wouldn't change that a whole lot. I don't think it would have an impact on our occupancy. I think what a lot of these other folks who do charge higher rates, they have to do that because of their occupancy rating. Whereas, again, at 100% and people waiting and clamoring after our slips, we don't have to go that route. So I think the impact dollar-wise on an average slip holder would be minimal at a 3%.
So then what are the cons to raising it to be more in line with other CPI adjustments?
That's a good question. I would have to say, other than people have just become used to the 2%, and this would be a little bit different. That's one con I could see.
It's just the track we've been on. It's been working, so it's not that broken that we need to fix it, I believe, if that's a fair answer.
Okay. Maybe if it doesn't change beyond 2% this year, you might want to put an asterisk in your billing statement that the Finance Committee is asking questions, and it could go up higher next year. If notice to you is important as a value for your department, now would probably be a good time to start putting people on notice. And then the other question, the public parking permit. Can you tell us again, what's the relationship with the parking permits and the city college and parking privileges between the two agencies?
Sure. So to address the city college issue, I believe the city's has a joint powers agreement since 1962, whereby we share a lot of our resources between the city and Santa Barbara City College. We at the waterfront obviously are right there, and so we have an agreement with Santa Barbara City College where students are allowed to park in our parking lots. They primarily park in the Ledbetter lot and the Harbor West lot to attend their classes, because obviously Santa Barbara City College does not have enough parking to accommodate all of their driving students. So they're allowed to do that through the school year, Monday through Friday, and they're also allowed to park in our lots during the summer sessions, I should say, as they have too. So they can do that. They don't have to purchase one of our permits. They just have to purchase one of their own city college permits. Although we do find, they'll purchase both on occasion, so they can park at any one of our lots at any time during the year. So that's our relationship with City College. We also derive some revenue from the La Playa lots, which are on their side of Cabrillo Boulevard there. I believe we get, whenever they're not in session, so weekends and then the summers, component of summer where they're not in session, we get those revenues as well. So we do work a lot with their parking staff just to make sure we understand each other and where everybody's coming from. So that's our relationship with City College in a nutshell.
So you receive a portion or all of the revenues from the La Playa lots on the weekends?
I believe it is all of the revenues from those lots, which is not a lot. I mean, most people, they're coming to the beach, they want to be closer to the beach, and so they park in our lots.
People who are going to the track to do stadiums and participate, so that revenue comes to the city?
Exactly.
But is that because we manage any of that equipment or the lots?
They manage the equipment and they have their own parking system. But the lots, those are those are city property. The La Playa lots, if I remember correctly.
Yes, the City College folks bring their revenue over to us. They collect it out of their own machines and then bring it to us during the times in the summer weekends and so forth.
That seems very generous. Why? What do we own that land?
That is city-owned land, yes, along with the stadium. It's not known by many people,
Okay.
but yeah, it goes back to this 1962 agreement, which is pretty interesting.
And is that agreement indefinite? Is there a term to it?
I believe it is an evergreen agreement, but I want to say there were components of it that were adjusted in recent years. It was headed up by the Parks Department. A number of fees and things like that were significantly outdated were updated, but I believe the agreement, the Joint Powers Agreement as a whole, is an evergreen. It just goes on. I think there are options for both parties to move out, but I don't think we've ever gotten to that point.
So have you ever looked at any changes for the La Playa lots in terms of either how you manage it, or I know you changed recently the systems at Ledbetter?
They have a similar system where it's a pay and display. Obviously, with City College, I believe when you register as a student over a certain number of units, you have to buy one of their parking permits. So their walk-up pay and display machines like we have in almost all of our lots aren't real handy for them since, again, 99% of those people are students already with a parking permit. The relationship has worked out quite well. They allow us to use it for special events that we have, whether it be the Harbor and Seafood Festival. So we do work well together as far as special events are concerned and things like that.
Okay, great, thank you.
Councilmember Friedman?
I'm going to follow up on this first and then go back to the slip fee run. I just had a comment. But on the City College lot, I'm trying to understand when a City College student has a City College permit and parks in the Ledbetter lot, do we get any revenue from that permit?
No, we do not. That revenue all goes to City College.
The reason I bring this up, maybe for next year's discussion, but is I actually went a couple weeks ago, went there on Wednesday at 10 a.m. in every single space, with the exception of one, and I was there to go paddling, was full, and they were basically all City College, and there was about 4 or 5 other cars that were trying to find a space. So I thank you for bringing it up, Councilmember Dominguez, because I think the primary use of those spots should be for beach users, and if they're getting full of City College students, there's an issue with beach access there, and this is just during the day. And so I think we should look at that again, because the other thing is it also encourages City College students to drive if they know they have that lot. And one of the things that we need to do is look at the alternative transportation investment. So if there's an extra lot that should be used for beachgoers, but it's being used for students, I think that's a larger issue. So I would ask if you and the Harbor Commission could look at that issue over the next year as part of looking back at these rates for the next fiscal year going maybe to 3% or 2%. And going back to the 2%, just for a little my personal perspective, having been on the Harbor Commission, kind of when this change went, there was every year there was a lot of controversy that came up with that with the slip fee. So this was a way to increase the fees and kind of work with the community down there, because we do have some liveaboards there, which we want to maintain that aspect of it without pricing them out. The other is, if you could clarify, is this 2% also goes towards our fishing boats, or are they separate from our fishing fleet?
Regarding the commercial fishing fleet, the 2% does not. Let me get to that real quick here. It does go to our commercial fleet. I was getting confused about the slip permit transfer fee, which is not. This $25 increase does not apply to those specifically designated commercial fishing slips, but it would go the 2% to the entirety of our 1,143 slips.
So I would just make the comment, as you study whether or not to go to 2 or 3% next year, that you also look specifically at the fees we're charging our commercial fishing fleet, because they are under a lot of pressure for a lot of reasons that we don't need to get into today. So I'll be very hesitant to put any more economic pressures, because that's what makes our harbor. It's a working harbor, and our fishermen are an asset in this community. So I just ask you to look at that as a separate, not separately, but look at that as an issue, so that we're not having impacts to them when you look at it.
We can do that.
And I guess one last question, just so I understand this in context. What is 1% revenue on slip fees, slip rental fees? What is that number on an annual basis?
So in total, the 2% increase would be the equivalent of just under $90,000. I believe it's $89,500 and change.
So $45,000 per percent. Okay.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Any other questions? Is there a motion?
I'll move.
You'll move the staff recommendation. Is there a second? Second. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Oppose and abstain? None. Matter carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Reedman. Thank you, Mr. Bossi.
We actually have an additional fee change. This is actually related to the general fund, and it entails dockless electric scooters. Rebecca Bjork, our Public Works Director, is going to speak to this item.
Good afternoon, Finance Committee. I'm Rebecca Bjork, Public Works Director, and this is rather a last-minute change to add an impound fee for scooters that are left on the sidewalk or in public right-of-way. City Municipal Code 10.56 already authorizes impounding these vehicles. However, there's no fee set, and this would set the fee. I have sent council a memo about concerns we have about the dockless electric scooters being deployed in the city ahead of us, working with the businesses to figure out how to make sure that they don't create a nuisance. That will take some time. I will be at council on June 19th to have a conversation with council about and get direction on working with that group. However, we know that they're interested now in being here based on information that we're hearing first or second hand from companies such as Limebike and Spin. So we just want to have a tool available as soon as we can if we start getting nuisance issues from these vehicle scooters.
Any questions for Ms. Bjork? Councilmember Dominguez.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
I do have a question about why the $100. That's what you surveyed around other communities.
Honestly, it's two different agencies that have an impound fee in place. Santa Monica, I think, is 60, and I believe it's Austin. It's 100. We still have to figure out where to put these. We're going to have somebody pick them up and transport them. It's supposed to be a deterrent.
Yeah, I know. I totally understand the issue. I've been reading the articles about Coronado, enforcement nightmare, companies that, at least in that instance, companies that, did not cooperate with local government. This is another example of, companies that have a business model that is predatory on public infrastructure, and they don't have any concern for that. I would make this really sting, and I would make it $200.
We're open to whatever council would like to put in there.
Because I think that these companies need to get their attention before this becomes a problem. Because in Coronado, it's become a giant problem, and even with this fee, that it hasn't ameliorated that concern. So, were there any other thoughts, Councilman Friedman?
Were you proposing something higher?
Yeah, I'd propose $500. If somebody's just going to litter scooters on the sidewalk and say that's their business model, it's not their problem, I think we should have staff ready to pick them up and charge them for them.
All right.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Councilmember Dominguez.
Does the impound fee then, is that including storage?
Yes, it's the cost to collect, notify, and store. Well, it's not even the cost. It is to offset or reimburse the city for the impacts of having to do that.
Right. Yeah, it seems like 100 would be reasonable or ballpark if we were just picking it up and someone was going to come pick it up within a month. But there's also a good chance we may be the new custodians of these for their lifespan or until we find a way to get rid of them. So I think maybe $500 is reasonable as long as there's some good processes to make sure there's not abuse of the system or that these companies can reasonably reobtain these pieces of equipment. But just on a personal note, I was in San Francisco this last weekend for a few hours, and on 2nd and Harrison, which is south of Market, just within like 2 minutes, several electric scooters went by, electric bikes, regular scooters, electric skateboards, and non-electric skateboards. So the whole spectrum of human and human-assisted powered transportation went by, while vehicular traffic was at a near standstill. It was closing hours, so rough commute time, rush hour commute time. But it was just amazing to see the spectrum of vehicles they're using there to get around. Rollerblades, they even saw rollerblades. So they are probably coming.
Well, and I could certainly see where they would be, a help and an asset if they were properly operated. But folks flying around on scooters on sidewalks is a public health and safety threat, and we need a cooperative operator to make this work in Santa Barbara. And if they're going to cooperate, that's one thing. If they're not, I think we need to send a message right away that that's not okay. Councilmember Friedman.
Just a quick comment. So you're coming back into the full council in July about the whole permitting and the whole process?
I'm sorry, I may have said July. I meant June 19th, I believe, is when it is.
So you're coming back for the full council on this
That's
issue?
correct, yeah.
So I'll support this, but as part of that, if 500 is the deterrent, or if there's another number as you do your research, I'm open to that in the long range, but I'll be supporting at 500 just because right now we don't have any protections in place.
And we'll have a second opportunity when this is at council to adjust that number if it isn't right. In the meantime, you can have a conversation with them and tell them that the Finance Committee has recommended $500.
That's great. And actually, June 19th is still ahead of the budget being adopted, so we could even change it then.
Great. Okay, thank you. Is there a motion?
I'll move 500.
Okay, is there a second? Second. Motion's been made and seconded. Any questions or comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Oppose and abstain? No one? The matter carries unanimously. Thank you. Mr. Samario.
Just wanted to mention that Ms. Janika Dykes is here. She's going to make a presentation. I know she has to leave for LA, so there's no action required today. We're going to come back next week with all recommendations. So this will be an opportunity for you to hear her request and then take some questions. But again,
thank you, Mr. Samario. Ms. Janika Dykes, thank you for being here.
Mr. Chair, members of the council, my name is Kathy Janika Dykes. I'm president and CEO of Visit Santa Barbara. There we go. Sorry. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm here to request $150,000 one-time funding for tourism recovery efforts. If we could go to the next slide. As you all know, the tourism industry has been severely impacted by the Thomas Fire and the Montecito debris flow. We certainly lost both leisure as well as group travel business in the wake of the disasters. And frankly, we're at risk at losing even more business in the future. There is a perception that the city of Santa Barbara has been destroyed or that it's unsafe to visit. So between the global press coverage, as you can see, those were some of the headlines, and certainly the evacuations that followed, Santa Barbara has a serious perception problem to overcome. I still feel optimistic that we will overcome, and we just need additional resources to be able to add more momentum to the recovery. So as you're aware, we outlined a three-phase recovery approach. Immediately after the debris flow, phase one was the information impact assessment, dissemination of all of the facts to both our visitors as well as our hospitality community. The second phase is really welcoming visitors back to the area, and we've heavily invested in the Southern California market. We had to immediately pivot and change our marketing strategy to focus on Southern California. Phase three, which is what we're in right now, as well as still focusing on Southern California. It's about rebuilding demand for long haul and group business. So since launching in January, the Santa Barbara Shines campaign has generated over 32 million impressions. On the screen before you is a list of all of our marketing initiatives. Please don't worry, I'm not going to walk through every one of those initiatives, but it clearly outlines that we have been aggressive in all of our outreach to focus on bringing back group business, leisure business, and focusing and working with our media. We need to get the word out that Santa Barbara was indeed open for business. Looking ahead, we also are working with Lawson and Amtrak on a really clever and innovative campaign that we will be launching in July. And we're actually using some of our reserve funds for that campaign, and you'll hear more about that in the upcoming month. Just ahead on the screen right now is just an example of some of the new initiatives we had to conduct, things that we never did before in the past, and that includes putting up billboards, digital billboards in Los Angeles and also San Francisco. We have large images of Santa Barbara on the ground as well as on the walls of the Embarcadero station of San Francisco. I wish that I knew that you were going there so you could have gone and taken a look at that as well too. So we're trying to transition out of the recovery phase right now, but continuing to market to the Southern California market. So it's a little bit of straddling of our regular programming and still focusing on SoCal. So here's kind of the reality. In December, obviously, we saw the devastating effect of the fire, which led to the immediate decrease of room rates as well as the TOT revenues. As you recall, many people in our community left the area for about a 3-week period. And then from January through March, the average daily rate of our lodging industry continued to underperform, certainly prior to the previous year. We did see growth in the transient occupancy tax collections because we did, certainly hotels were booked because of evacuations for 3 weeks in January and then subsequent evacuations both in February and March. But as you can see, the TOT collections have continued to decline with just a very nominal increase in the month of March. Other factors that need to be taken into consideration with this TOT growth, certainly from January through March, is the Hotel California growth. So we're now seeing TOT generated from the Hotel California that we did not see in 2017. And in December through March, not only did we have evacuees staying in our hotels, we had first responders that were staying in our hotels, and certainly employees that live south of Santa Barbara that were staying here for the week as well, too. We're all seeing a shift of business with the Four Seasons closure. It's dispersing some of that luxury business to the city hotels here, the luxury hotels. Four Seasons is scheduled to open in June 1st. We no longer will see that source of business. And then also we saw a slight increase in business in March because there was a shift in spring break. Last year, Easter was held in later April, so most of that spring break business occurred in April instead of March. So beyond these key metrics, I also want to mention that chart that you just saw really doesn't represent the visitor industry as well. It doesn't represent the profile of the visitor industry. It really reflected all of those factors that we just discussed. But beyond those key metrics, we look to assess business. There are some other discerning and concerning data points that have our industry on alert. There are many hotels have certainly communicated to me that they are behind pace for advance bookings, in some case 10 to 20%. I get a lot of calls from a lot of hotels on a daily basis, and they're expressing concerns, and we're very concerned about a soft summer. Our group business continues to remain a little bit soft. And then just even looking at our metrics on our website traffic, the web traffic on the lodging page has been down 25%. And more importantly, our booking referrals, and these are referrals that go directly to the lodging pages, is down 39.5%. Again, other indicators that we have not completely recovered from the disasters. So as we move forward, certainly, can we go to the next slide? We need to adapt to this new normal environment. Actually, let's go back to the other slide. So, disaster aside, we're certainly looking at highly competitive tourism marketplace, certainly like Palm Springs, Napa, and Monterey, who are vying for the same visitor. And as I mentioned, it's going to be increasingly clear that it's going to be a slow road, likely a 2-year process to restore our reputation, or certainly our reputation was tarnished, and to reclaim this lost market share. Again, I'm optimistic that we can do this with added resources. As I'd mentioned previously, we are using some of our marketing reserve funds to fund some of our campaigns. The one in particular, as I referenced earlier, is an Amtrak Lausanne campaign that we'll be running in mid-July. We still have some reserve funds, but we must maintain those to protect our organization as well too. So therefore, I'm here to request this additional $150,000. Again, it's one-time funding for a specific campaign. This campaign has been designed to generate buzz for the city of Santa Barbara by really showcasing Santa Barbara in a new and compelling way. And it is designed to generate business, immediate business for the city of Santa Barbara. And we believe that we need this momentum builder to start getting some of that lost business share and really inspiring Los Angeles to begin traveling to the area. So if we could go to the next slide. I don't want to be Debbie Downer here. There is a brighter side as well, too. Obviously, we're in a challenging landscape, but our community, certainly and our destination, have so much going in our favor, and there's so many opportunities to leverage and overcome our present challenges, and we're equally focused on the bright side. Certainly starting from the fact that our community and industry are very tight-knit. I think we saw that clearly in the last few months, how our business community, our government agencies, our hospitality community, we're very much united in our efforts to focus on tourism recovery. And that come-together spirit, I don't think I've ever seen before, and it's really quite powerful. And then we've also, Santa Barbara's always been a very friendly, welcoming destination, but I believe that spirit has also been elevated in the wake of the disaster, too. Our visitors are being embraced in a way that we've never, like never before. And there is that feeling and sense of gratitude for all of that business. So this is a very positive trend, and we can continue to leverage that. We're also very fortunate that the infrastructure in the city of Santa Barbara is really basically unharmed right now. We certainly had to focus on Coast Village Road, but fortunately they're up and running right now. But we have a town that that has not been damaged and very much welcoming visitors. We also have a lot of new product that we have seen coming to the area with Hotel California opening last year, a number of new restaurants and other visitor servicing businesses. This is all very good and positive things that are good for our community and good for our visitors. And lastly, the marketing landscape, as I referenced earlier, may be cluttered and may be crowded, but it also means that there are some channels and innovative tactics at our disposal, and we need to really push our creative limits and think outside that box. So on that note, I want to show you a concept of how we would invest the requested $150,000 to fuel immediate bookings. So we contacted our agency of record, and they recommend what they call an out-of-home approach, and that literally means out of the area. And this medium is proven to encourage more online activity per ad spend than any other medium. And there's a fact that travelers look at 38 sites on average before they book a vacation. And we want to simplify that process and really introduce a one-click shop to buy a Santa Barbara vacation. So we're literally bringing a pop-up shop into the Southern California market that will feature a wall of Santa Barbara social images that are literally bookable packages. We'll promote the activation with billboards that will drive traffic to the physical location as well as an online shop. And this campaign will also be supported by digital ads and campaigns leveraging mobile technology. And we can extend this campaign even further by partnering with a fashion brand to create a capsule American Riviera collection and taking the shop on the road for a multi-city tour, and certainly partnering with a major brand to develop custom content around the collection. So this was one example of a way that we would use that $150,000 to invest in a campaign that we believe would have immediate results, being able to track the bookings immediately. It's clever, it's innovative, it hasn't been done before, but we also have other ideas that money could be used for, and I'm happy to provide additional samples. So thank you again for considering this request. We are very grateful for all of the city's support. You have been absolutely tremendous in supporting our recovery efforts, and we do feel optimistic that we will be able to turn this around. Thank you.
Thank you for the great presentation. Councilmember Friedman.
Just want to thank you for being here today and all that you, Visit Santa Barbara, have done to really turn this around, and having Visit California come down earlier in the year, and just the marketing you're doing. One thing that came up yesterday during our budget on the golf fund was our golf course has really turned around, and it was the course coach said out of their 33 courses, I think, that they mystery shop, and it was rated number 1 at all their courses. So if we had given some direction to ask them to coordinate with you on potential marketing campaigns for golf, especially since it's one of the more affordable courses. So that would be something as you're looking to the summer to work with our golf course in particular as part of it. But really just want to thank you for the work you're doing and for hearing this at the full council.
Thank you. And Councilman Friedman, I will follow up with the representatives of the golf course on that.
Any chance that our neighboring jurisdictions could participate in this effort? City of Carpinteria, City of Goleta, potentially the County of Santa Barbara?
Councilman Hart, we can certainly approach the City of Goleta. And there is an opportunity to do that. The City of Carpinteria doesn't participate in our Tourism Business Improvement District, nor finance any of our campaigns right now. So we do not have any relationship with them in terms of tourism promotion. But we can certainly reach out to a few of the other jurisdictions to see if they would be interested as well, too.
It'd be great if you could do that before we decide at council. I mean, it seems that it is a regional benefit, and we'd love to have our partners that ask us for help all the time participate in something that we all benefit from.
Okay. I'd be happy to go ahead and reach out to them.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Dominguez?
No, just basically ditto to what you've both said, doing a great job, and keep up the good work, and we'll support you as much as we can. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So
last item.
We have, at the request of Committee Member Friedman, we wanted to present to you what's called the Arts and Economic Vitality Program. Used to be called the Community Promotions Budget. We're running a little short of time. We can easily push this back to next week, but
okay, next week sounds like a plan.
Yep.
It is tight.
Okay, great. We'll do that.
Very much.
Thank you.
We are adjourned.